94.9. It is 10 minutes past 8. And we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good morning, Dr. John.
Yeah, good morning, Mick.
It's great to have you here again, Dr. John, on this wet Tuesday morning. Nice to see the rain, though.
Yeah, oh no, the rain's excellent for the gardens and tops up the water, so I don't think we should complain about rain.
No, not at all. Now, Dr. John, last week we were talking about, the planets in the, a long way away from us. And, how there's Astro, all sorts of guys looking for, planets and places for us to move to one day. And they were talking about how, some of these planets might be better for us to live on than Earth. And, of course, you mentioned that it would take, millions and millions and millions and millions of years just to get there at, travelling at pretty much at the fastest speed we can possibly travel at, which is nowhere near light speed. But I saw in the news this morning there was a headline that said Voyager spacecraft detect an increase in density of space outside the solar system. So, maybe those spaceships will go a little slower than we first thought.
Yeah, well, it might take them a bit longer. And, I mean, last week I talked about how these nearest so-called exoplanets were about 100 light years, not 100 million light years, 100 light years, but travelling at the fastest spacecraft we've been able to produce so far, it would take you nearly 2 million years to get there. So, so they're not going to be weekenders anytime soon. But look, I think that was an interesting topic that we raised last week. We talked about what they call these exoplanets. Mm-hmm. And it's really given rise to a new breed of speculative scientists. Mm-hmm. They call them now astrobiologists. Mm-hmm. Well, astrobiologists don't really study anything that they really know. Mm. They're studying what might be. Mm. And they've identified, apparently, and this was a paper put out by Washington State University, they've discovered a number of these exoplanets, maybe about 4,000 of them, that they believe exist out there. Mm-hmm. And these are planets that might be revolving around a star similar to our sun and might be able to sustain life. Mm-hmm. And they identified in this particular paper 24 of what they thought were their best candidates in our Milky Way galaxy or beyond. And they also described what improvements they might be able to generate on these planets to make them even better than Earth for habitability. And in other words, areas where the conditions on Earth could be improved upon. Mm-hmm. Now, as a matter of fact, there probably are some, because we know from a biblical perspective that we live in a fallen world and things are not quite as good as they were when the earth was first created. The entry of sin into the human race actually spoiled everything. But I think you'd probably argue that our Creator knows a lot more than the experts, so I wouldn't set too much store by some of their suggested improvements. No,
well, I noticed that the experts this week, they put up their hand and said Betelgeuse, which is one of the biggest stars in the sky. It's nowhere near as far away as they first thought, and it's nowhere near as big as they first thought. So they basically just said, look, we were completely wrong.
Yeah, look, that's interesting that you mentioned Betelgeuse, because there we are. A week ago it was where it was, and now it's 25% closer. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, 25% is quite a lot.
When you're talking, millions and millions and millions and millions of kilometres, that's a long way.
Well, it's quite a significant error, 25%, I would have thought. But look, these astrobiologists think that maybe if the Earth were a bit larger and there were a bit more land to water ratio and maybe a bit wetter and even a bit warmer, 5 degrees warmer, they suggest. And we're told that we can't afford to be 5 degrees warmer here on Earth. But look, it is all very, very speculative. But then I got a phone call during the week from a friend who's also a regular listener. And he said, have you ever seen the movie The Privileged Planet?
Mm-hmm.
I said, no, I haven't heard of it. Well, he said, I'll drop you the DVD in and you can have a look at it, and maybe it's worth exploring what we're talking about a bit further. And it's actually a film about a book that was published in the early 2000s, and it's interesting that you mentioned Voyager, because the movie starts off with Voyager looking back towards Earth and seeing it as this tiny dot of light in the distance. So that's how it starts off. But yeah, when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about that movie, because it's very, very good.
Sounds exciting. You're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. It is 16. He's been talking to us this morning a little bit about those planets way out there in the cosmos, and about a movie that he's been looking at, which started with Voyager, those there's two of them, little spacecraft that are heading away from Earth, a long way from Earth. In fact, they've moved right out of what they call the heliosphere into what we used to think was a vacuum of space, Dr. John. And now they're saying, well, it's actually not a vacuum out there, which is quite interesting. There's still density, and they're finding it's even denser out there than in the heliosphere.
Yeah, well, look, Mick, those spacecraft that we've got out there, they are revolutionising a lot of our thinking, and of course just showing us how much we don't know, really, because all of the information that comes back often overturns what was previously taught.
But I mean, this sort of information will be saying to those guys, it's going to be even harder to ever get to those other stars or planets.
Yeah.
So I question, why do they continue?
Well, it's a lot of expensive exploration, but I guess the information that comes back, as I said, tells us how much we don't know, and really, from our perspective as Christians, how much we really need to believe the book that does know what it's talking about. But look, interestingly enough, you said how the spacecraft are now beyond our heliosphere, and that's one of the things that is mentioned in this particular movie, The Privileged Planet, because about 500 years ago our thinking was absolutely revolutionised by a guy called Nicholas Copernicus, because previous to that, the most people on Earth believed what the Greeks had taught, Aristotle and so on, that the Earth was the centre of the universe, and the sun and the moon and the stars revolved around the Earth. Well, Copernicus recognised that no, the sun is at the centre, and the rest of us revolve around the sun, and that it was the heliocentric view with the sun at the centre. And of course, these spacecraft have now gone beyond the sun's influence outside the heliosphere. But look, Copernicus actually enunciated another principle that is probably wrong, and it's called the Copernican principle. He knew that there were other stars way beyond our solar system, and although he believed in a creator, he also accepted that the Earth was really nothing special. And that's been taken up really big time in our day and age, particularly by a guy called Carl Sagan, who decided that Earth is nothing special at all. It's just a second-rate planet orbiting a second-rate star, and that it's actually a delusion to think that we are anything special. And of course, Hubble discovered all of these not solar systems, but galaxies beyond our own Milky Way galaxy. So logically, if you also believe that the whole universe has evolved and came into being through the Big Bang, then maybe you would accept that the Earth is nothing special. Maybe it's just an accident that life evolved here on Earth. And so if it did, then maybe it did so on all of these other supposedly habitable planets that the astrobiologists are looking at. And of course, that led to the formation of the organisation called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Yes.
And SETI has been active for quite a number of years now, but strangely enough, to date, it hasn't discovered any evidence of any of that life that is supposedly on other planets that might be even more special than Earth. But look, that's what really led to the rise of this new breed of speculative scientists called the astrobiologists. And they're the ones that we were talking about last week and again this week. And what they're looking at is what would it take actually for life to arise elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But when you look closely at it, it turns out, and this is what the movie talks about, Earth has a lot of very, very uncommon features, and these features are absolutely essential for life as we know it, because what the spacecraft are discovering is that it would seem that chemistry and physics are pretty much the same out there as they are here on Earth. They are I'm sure there are going to be some surprises in store for us, but basically chemistry and physics operate the same everywhere else. Mm-hmm. And one of the very uncommon features that Earth has got that's absolutely essential for life is liquid water. Now, liquid water is quite a rarity because if the planet is too close to the sun, then the water's not going to remain liquid. It's going to evaporate. If it's slightly too far away, it's going to freeze over. And either of those conditions are going to mean that that life is not possible because so many chemical reactions are dependent on liquid water. So its presence is absolutely critical. But it turns out that there's a whole host of other parameters too that are essential, and we'll talk about a couple of those when we come back.
All righty. It is 25 minutes past 8. You're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. If you have any questions, please send them through to our text line. It is 0401. Dr. John, we've been talking about, planets and how, there's guys that have been studying planets elsewhere, saying how they're probably better than this planet right here, yet, for life that is, yet I reckon this planet's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy here, and I've heard so many other people saying that, we live on a planet that can't change too much. As soon as it gets too hot or too cold, we just can't survive. As soon as it doesn't have this or it doesn't have that, we can't survive. Yet these guys are saying, there's probably planets out there that are way better than here. How can that be true?
Well, when you look at what Earth has got going for it, there's a lot more than immediately meets the eye. And apart from liquid water, which is clearly a rarity as far as we know in the universe, one of the things that this particular movie, The Privileged Planet, mentioned was something that I'd never really thought of before. Mm-hmm. And that is that what we have in our solar system, the other planets, they're not there by accident. The big planets like Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune, they're there to protect the Earth. Now you might think, when you look up in the sky, they're only a small spot, but they have very, very high gravity. And one of the things that they do is that they mop up marauding asteroids and comets that might impact on and do damage here to Earth. Wow. And in fact, I remember the footage only a couple of years ago of a comet called Shoemaker-Levy that broke up and crashed into Jupiter. And that's their job, to mop up these, because of their gravity, to attract any stray comets and asteroids that are likely to do damage to Earth.
Wow. Now, this movie, is it a Christian movie?
Well, it's put out by Focus on the Family, but it didn't mention anything about Jesus.
Okay, now I just had a question come through. I know it's not a CMI movie, but this guy said sort of sounds like an interesting movie. Where can I get it? Now, it's not one of your movies, but is it something you can find on the internet?
Oh, you can watch it online. And apart from watching the DVD that my friend brought around, I watched it online as well.
Oh.
All you've got to do is type in Google movie The Privileged Planet, and you'll be able to watch it.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah, no, it's pretty easy to watch. And of course, one of the other things about Earth is it's got to be orbiting the right sort of star, apparently a dwarf star, and the sun happens to fit the bill. It gives the right heat. We have to have sufficient gravity to retain an atmosphere, because the atmosphere is held in place by the Earth's gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's again a rarity in the out there, as far as we know.
Yep.
And that atmosphere has to be the perfect composition, oxygen rich. The orbit that the planet is in needs to be almost a circular orbit, which ours is.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be orbited by an extra large moon, needs to have tectonic plates, a molten core, a magnetic field, all of these things. And there's so many of the essentials that the astrobiologists in this particular movie did a calculation, and they decided that if they allowed a 10% probability of any of these things occurring by chance, and of course it has to be by chance if evolution is true, then they came up with the idea that there was about a 1 in 1,000 trillion chances of it all happening by chance, So, now, of course, some of those early scientists like Copernicus and Galileo and Newton, Kepler, that they were believers in a creator God.
Mm.
But of course the modern day scientists are not. But the odds against it happening by chance haven't changed. They're still the same.
I mean, that's amazing. Some of those things you've just mentioned this morning, I had never considered.
No.
That the planets out there are literally mopping up asteroids and space rock, basically. I'd never really thought of that. Yet that's what they're doing with their own gravity, and they're sort of spinning around the outside of us. But then, of course, we see so many bits and pieces out there, that orbit different things. And they orbit in this big egg shape, not in a perfect circle. And of course, if Earth did that around the sun, we'd freeze,
That's right.
one
Yes.
half of the year, and we'd burn up the other half of the year.
Yeah, that's right. It's got to be almost a circular orbit. But I mean, there's even more. Apart from Earth having to be in what they call the Goldilocks zone around the sun,
Mm-hmm.
not too hot, not too cold, just right. Apparently, there's a habitable zone in a galaxy, and we happen to be in the habitable zone in this galaxy. And the other interesting thing that the movie talked about, our atmosphere happens to be transparent. Now, the atmosphere on most other planets and what seems to be elsewhere in our galaxy and solar system is that atmospheres are not transparent. Now, because ours is, scientists are able to make observations. They wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't transparent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other interesting thing too is that when we have eclipses of the sun by the moon, there's an essential requirement there that the moon looks to be about the same size in the sky as the sun. That's because it's 1/400th of the size of the sun, but it's 400 times closer. So when it eclipses the sun, it almost perfectly covers it.
Yep.
That then allows scientists to examine what's going on in the sun, because they can't look at it without the moon covering most of it.
Yep.
So then they look at the little glowing rim around the edge and work out what's going on in the sun. And it turns out, of course, that it's electromagnetic radiation, but it's in the visible spectrum.
Yes.
And if it weren't in the visible spectrum, then photosynthesis wouldn't be possible, and we wouldn't have any plant life on the planet. So, I mean, the number of things that put us in this Goldilocks zone are just astonishing. And I would recommend anybody Google movie The Privileged Planet and watch it. It's a great show.
Sounds good. I think I'll do it myself. It is 16 minutes to 9. We're with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. Please send your questions through 0401, talking about the planets and ours in particular that's in the Goldilocks zone, and how it's very, very difficult to have a planet that is just so blessed.
Yeah, just absolutely so right. And we talked about this movie, The Privileged Planet, and I must say, as I watched it, Mick, I couldn't help thinking of what David says in Psalms, you know, when I consider the heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and stars that you put in their place, you know, what is man that you're mindful of him, you know? And it really is astonishing when you think of it, that each one of us is unique, and if we're Christians, we are uniquely chosen by the Creator God who made that universe. I mean, that is just absolutely astonishing. And we're all put in a position on Earth. Here we are living here in Australia. We've all got a particularly chosen role to play, every one of us. You know, God has a life designed for each one of us. I think that's absolutely fantastic that the God who created the universe can have a plan for each one of us. And interestingly enough, I read during the week a book about a well-known missionary by the name of Gladys Aylward. Now, Gladys was a missionary to China, and she actually had a film made about her life called The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, starring Ingrid Bergman, which I've seen. It's a wonderful movie. But the book, I tell you what, it really is astonishing. And you can see how God has a unique plan for every one of us, because some of the things that he got her to do, to go and preach the gospel to particular individuals in China who were in difficult positions or whatever. You know how this is God. He cares for everybody, and there's not a single person on the face of the earth that he doesn't care for. And then when you look at yourself and you think, who am I? What am I that God cares for me? But he does, you know. And the fact that we are uniquely chosen is astonishing. And God cares for us. He provides for us. You know, Jesus elaborated on that on the Sermon on the Mount, you know, how he said, don't worry, you know, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. Because, you know, even Solomon in all his glory wasn't clothed like the lilies of the field. You know, the birds of the air have got enough to eat. So why do you care? You know, put your trust in God, and you won't have any other problems. And that's where it's all at. We are called to live a life of faith. We know that God is there. We know that he's put his angels charge over us to watch us wherever we go. We've simply got to believe it. And we don't even think about it. That's the tragedy. And I've made a determination that I'm going to consider that a whole lot more after looking at some of these things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it really is. It's an amazing, I guess, cosmos when you look at the way we've been uniquely positioned. I mean, this is the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. And when you consider all the other factors that go into life here on Earth, it's pretty much impossible to be anywhere else, yet that is an amazing cosmos out there. There's so much of it, there's so much that we don't know about it, yet what we do know just shows that we're living in a blessed spot in the cosmos, and we are all individually blessed, and that's just awesome.
It is, Mick. It's just amazing. And look, there's a couple of other things that I was going to talk about this morning, but we're not going to have time. I particularly wanted to talk about the discovery of a dinosaur fossil by a young 12-year-old Canadian boy. That was interesting too. So we'll talk about that next week. But let me encourage listeners out there. Send in your questions. Text them through to our text line, because we really want to focus on the things that interest you. You know, we can talk every Tuesday about the things that interest us, and Mick and I both look at the science news and see what's going on, and we decide that there are certain things that we're going to talk about, but we'd love to hear from you. You know, we want you as the listeners to text us in your questions, and we're going to address them, and we can have a much more interesting discussion if we're focusing on what our listeners really want to hear.
Absolutely. And that number is 0401